Close to 4 years have passed since the Marikana tragedy that claimed the lives of 34 mine workers. On the eve of what some called a turning point for South Africa, we look at what has changed in this small mining town. Kelden Ogmo has more.
Four years after police shot and killed 34 striking mine workers at a koppie in Marikana, little has changed. Not much has been done to improve the lives of the families who lost their loved ones and the workers living around the area.
As you look, nothing much has come forth from other sectors, like for instance the government. We demanded the apology. And then we demanded compensation. There was a long litigation under the Falam Commission, of which the results of it also open another element of class and commission, of which all these are monies that we have to part with in order to be represented.
Advocate Dalim Pofu, representing the deceased and the affected miners, said the Marikana tragedy represents a serious turning point for South Africa.
We are now, after tomorrow, we will be building up to the 5th commemorative event. And it would really be disgraceful if we reach that milestone of a 5th commemorative event without any movement in terms of looking after the widows, the children, and the welfare, general welfare of those who were affected as victims.
Bishop Sioka, who has been fighting for the betterment of the workers in Marikana, says very little has been done and the results of this year's election has shown it.
Formation or authorized by the workers to represent them. At this commemoration, we hope we can really press the point that enough is enough. It's about time that the government take the workers seriously. I think there has been, to some degree, a strong message coming out of the local elections.
AMCU will launch the Marikana Massacre AMCU Trust Fund on Tuesday and a housing project to assist the families of those who died. Trade Union AMCU has donated 2 million rand.
It's been 4 years since the Marikana Massacre. AMCU and representatives of all those who lost their lives on that fateful day says little has been done for the families of those who have been left behind. AMCU appeals to South Africans to contribute to the Marikana Trust. This is Kelden Ogmo for ANN7, Johannesburg.
And joining me in studio is Advocate George Bizos, human rights lawyer, and Levindo as a political analyst. Gentlemen, thanks indeed for your time. It is a turning point in the history of South Africa when this tragic event occurred 4 years ago. And Advocate Bizos, having represented some of the family members, your assessment of how this whole matter has been dealt with, what is your response?
Is the noise at the back necessary? Because...
All right. No, my question was just that your assessment of how the whole process has been going so far. What are your views?
Well, it was a process that started a very long time ago, almost 4 years ago. I am counsel at the Legal Resources Center. Our job is to be of assistance of poor people whose rights have been violated. As soon as we learned early in the morning after the shooting, we used our experience of the past that when people are shot dead and the police say that they shot them in self-defense, one of the facts that has got to be gone into as a matter of the utmost urgency is to say where are the bodies and send pathologists, doctors to examine the bodies, and more particularly where did the bullet land on the body of the deceased. Generally speaking, in the South African police, in the apartheid years, during the interim period between 90 and mid-1994, where there were shootings in the erstwhile independent black states, in the Val Triangle and elsewhere, we immediately sent a pathologist to examine the body, the dead body. Invariably, in our experience, and Marikana was no different, most of the shots entered the body in the back, which made nonsense of the suggestion that the police were in danger and they had no option but to shoot the people down.
Now, with this information, and there is a number of reports, and the Commission on the Fitness of Police Commissioner Ria Pieja, of which she has appealed. Levy, what kind of lessons should we be learning from this, especially with Advocate Bezos highlighting the fact that there was no justification in most of the cases or the victims in the Marikana massacre?
Good afternoon, Cindy. I think what we have learned as a nation, firstly, is to be very, very careful when we give certain individuals responsibilities, especially when people have to be given responsibilities of positions like a police commissioner, where certain decisions that affect lives are supposed to be taken. And obviously, if you look at the recommendations or the findings, they actually state that the police commissioner did not handle the matter or the issue in a manner that was actually expected of a person in a position. And obviously, it then questions the kind of appointment, the rationale behind appointing her in that position. And if that is not the only appointment that government has made, and if there are such other appointments that government has made, obviously government has to say, we have erred and we need to correct some of the appointments, if there are any, that they've actually made.
Is there a willingness, Advocate Bezos, on the part of the South African Police Service to take liability and responsibility for Marikana, or has it largely been a blame game?
Unfortunately, the police objected to the doctors that came up from Durban in order to attend the post-mortem examinations. They insisted, and to the credit of the local doctors, they said, we are doing the post-mortems. It is our duty to allow colleagues representing the relatives of the dead to be present, and if you don't allow them to be present, we want to do the post-mortems. They made up their minds, the police, that they will put up the same story that the nationalist police people did, the interim period police did, and that it would pass by as it did in the past. It didn't turn out that way for them. The commissioner, newly appointed, hardly experienced in matters of this nature, called a gathering of policemen of about 1,000 and praised them to the sky for the wonderful work that they had done. And they should be proud of it, that they behaved in the manner in which they did. The police thought that they would cover themselves up. They went from the Rustenburg area to Potchefstroom and spent 9 days putting a document together which was put in the commission as Exhibit L. We, from the Legal Resources Center, the senior counsel appointed by the commission to present the evidence, the representatives of the victims, represented by lawyers like Mr. Nsevenza and Mpofu and others, took this document and actually used the evidence of 3 experts on police behavior from overseas, blew the document to the sky as a false document. We were able to, using the expert evidence, using the evidence of people that were there and were seriously injured, and some others that were observers, that this document, 250 pages, was full of untruths, and we exposed it.
Advocate Bizos, we also have Professor Pitiga Gantuli from the Marikana massacre, Men in the Green Jacket exhibitor. Thanks so much, Professor Gantuli, for your time. Just in how we reflect this particular travesty of justice, the fact that the victims and survivors have not been compensated as yet. What does that say just about the urgency or the prioritizing of this particular matter on all sides?
Sensitivity as far as these issues are concerned, and especially from us as South Africans who have been victims of massacre during the apartheid. One would expect that at this particular moment in time, our sympathies and empathies should be with the survivors as well as the families of the people that have been needlessly killed. So there is a whole spirit of the need of Ubuntu. We speak Ubuntu, but in practical terms, there is absolutely nothing like that word.
And how do you reflect this so that history is not forgotten and we avert any similar incidences taking place through your work?
Yeah, so what I've done, I set up on 14 pieces with 44 faces. Using wheelbarrow frames, zinc, different gearboxes of cars and hose, and the man in a green in a blanket. We have a memorial that anybody who sees that, remembers what has actually happened, so that it becomes a deterrent that we don't. What interests me is that I've got a professor from 5 American universities see this Marikana memorial of mine, and yet no one in South Africa is interested in it except the general public.
That's really, really shocking. Nomzamo Zondo, Social Economic Rights Institute for the South African family lawyer. Thanks so much for joining us. Just in being poor and the fact that justice is denied, as the common narrative suggests, that if you don't have resources, you're disenfranchised, as is the case of the Marikana miners, that justice would be denied. Is that your view?
It is, definitely. I mean, the experience tells you that initially the families had to fight to participate in the commission. So it wasn't simply that everybody understood that there were 37 miners killed by the police. Where are their families? There was a fight in order to say, let these families be part of this commission. So first there was a failure to recognize their pain. And then we still sit 4 years later, and as you were saying earlier, and you were speaking earlier, there's been no compensation. There's been no prosecution of those that were involved. And it's simply, an issue of them not understanding these were human beings. These men were fathers, were brothers, were sons, and their families are grieving. Even worse, their families are suffering because they are no longer here.
Is it also convenient, especially when it comes to the mining sector, to forget that the economy of this country is anchored on the backs of poor migrant, largely migrant black workers, that black lives don't matter in this regard? Levin.
Well, you don't seem to observe an element of caring, especially on the mine owners. You have this perception that all they want to do is to make profit, and ensure that they get richer and richer. I would have expected a situation where the mine owners being the first to say, this tragedy has happened to breadwinners, it has happened to fathers and husbands to certain people, and they should have been on the forefront. But another area that worries me a lot is that there seems to be an element of dragging feet on the part of government to say, a commission was established, it came with its own findings. Why do we then have to wait for people to make a lot of noise and pressurize government to perform its own responsibilities? I thought a month or two immediately after the report was released, you would have seen something happening. But unfortunately, it's actually taking time. And it's actually very much frustrating. But at a political level, that's why now you'll start seeing political parties taking advantage of the situation to remind a government of its own responsibilities. And I think that is where other political parties have to come in and take advantage of the situation. Some people might say, don't use death for political gains. But at the same time, you need to see government taking responsibility as well.
So is there a lack of political will? Sorry to interrupt you, Levi. A lack of political will and perhaps not understanding that the best endeavor that government has is to ensure that the recommendations, number one, are implemented and to hold the mining company, Lonmin in this case, accountable.
Let me answer that. The LRC has one client, a grandfather with 4 grandchildren and a daughter-in-law, and the 25-year-old son was killed 85 meters from the spot that the police say that they were to be attacked. They couldn't deny it. We, at a meeting after the report of the commission, said that some people were liable. The police, the mining houses, and maybe others who should take initiative, particularly as the government, through the president, acknowledged that they are responsible for the victims. We, in the Legal Resources Center, took advantage of that admission, called a meeting of the lawyers and the people that represented the government at the commission and the lawyers of the president, and we made a proposal. The president has admitted that they are liable. The question of how much is a long and expensive process. The family of our grandfather client and the other client, a church organization, but in any event, we made it very clear. When I was asked, who are your clients, I mentioned those two, and I said, oh, by the way, our main client is the Constitution, and we are here to see that its provisions are put into effect. And What I suggested at the meeting, where senior counsel was present representing the president, other lawyers, you know, by the virtue of the president's admission, that you have to pay the grandfather some money. His son was earning, together with a house allowance, 6,500 a month. They haven't had a penny for almost 4 years while our meeting
But
took
isn't
place.
this an indictment, though, especially on Lonman, in just complying with their obligation, particularly when it goes to the socio-economic living conditions of the miners, over and above the compensation for the lives lost? Nomzamo.
Unlike the president, I haven't heard an admission of guilt from Lonman. But the fact that they did not behave as a trade union should have behaved in the circumstances, in not foreseeing the possible results, makes them responsible. But what we suggested, pay them per month or every quarter until the big cases come before the courts. Pay them and deduct from whatever they are awarded eventually, so that they can live, educate the grandchildren, live a life. The lawyers that we spoke to about 3 months ago agreed that it was a very good idea. We've been waiting for an answer. No answer and no action has taken place.
But if we have all these wonderful policies, the Constitution, as you say, Advocate Bezos, and it's not enforceable, particularly for those who are deprived, who are destitute, indigent, and only rely on pro bono services to have their voices heard, again, it's an indictment on Lonman themselves of having to come forward as a gesture of good faith in providing just the basic socio-economic conditions that is required. Why do you think this is still stalling?
You know, the problem of Lonman, the issue about Lonman, I think Advocate Bezos just outlined how they've failed to take any responsibility. In fact, they highlighted themselves as victims of the massacre. But it is true that even today as we speak, they failed to meet their SLP obligations. And even worse, when it came to the families, they had the families begging on their knees to have jobs at Lonman. It took almost a year for them to actually employ them at Lonman, and even then it came with conditions. So they refused to appoint three members from 3 families, claiming that we have no relationship with you. One of them was a contractor. In fact, his wife, when she spoke at the commission, she said, my husband used to wear a Lonman overall and would go down in Lonman shaft. But today, Lonman does not know him. One of them had been dismissed by Lonman wrongfully, and his group has been reinstated. But unfortunately, he's now dead. And one of them had been there purely to bring someone else lunch. And Lonman then says, it's not my problem. I don't know you. And I think the question that you posed earlier about government's failure to take responsibility and their own lack of political will to actually ensure that these mining houses comply with these SLPs. What is the point? Why should we have these as obligations if the state will not enforce them?
Professor Pitika Gantuli, just the commemoration in itself is very symbolic, and of course we'll hear a lot of rhetoric and speeches about what happened 4 years ago and moving forward, but very little consideration is given to the bereaved families and the surviving victims who are without any compensation. Justice clearly has been denied. We shouldn't even be commemorating this day in a celebratory manner. I mean, what approach should this particular day deserve in terms of commemorating the victims?
Yeah, I mean, Marikana is a symptom of a very wider problem we as South Africans have. How many massacres have we have? Do we have any memorials or monuments, to remind us of our history? And when you speak about loan mean, it's easy to say loan mean is faceless. But if you start unpacking who owns the loan mean, who are the shareholders of loan mean, then you're going to realize where the silence is, where the sales coming from. In as far as these poor people are, we are getting absolutely no compensation. It's another issue that indicates to us a very dire, tragic lack of leadership in the country. Now, when you start looking at it in a very simple analytical way, South Africa is run by the judiciary. It's no longer run by government. But each and everything ends up at the constitutional court, because political people cannot make decisions that actually stick, but instead people cultivate careful silences. Who benefits from loan mean? Immediately you ask yourself that kind of a question, then you will understand the silences.
All right, Professor Pitika Gantuli, thanks so much for your time. We have Levindo, political analyst, Advocate George Bezos, and Nomzamo Zondo, Social Economic Rights Institute, and she's a family lawyer. For now, though, we take a quick ad break. We'll see you shortly.